Hello, everybody. Welcome to the PEDSnet Data Science Analytics Track Training Program. This is your first presentation on PEDSnet, a Pediatric Clinical Research Network. And I'm delighted to be with you today. My name is Christopher Forrest. I'm the director of PEDSnet and also its founder. What I'd like to do today is give you a sense of PEDSnet's history, what we're trying to accomplish in PEDSnet, and then a variety of research studies that give you a flavor of how the network can be leveraged for research. After all of you are going to be conducting research with investigators in your institution, and I'd like to whet your appetite about some of the possibilities. So let's jump into this. There we go. In 2009, actually 2008, 2009, I was privileged to participate in a series of meetings at then the Institute of Medicine, now the National Academy of Medicine, that defined, described, and also promulgated the concept of a learning healthcare system. This became the conceptual motivator for developing PEDSnet. In fact, we held a meeting at the Institute of Medicine in which 25 institutions appeared and discussed all day long how to create a national scale pediatric learning health system. This was before all the institutions had fully implemented electronic health records across their enterprises. But everybody who was there knew that we were about to embark on a transformation in which we now and will digitize health and healthcare in ways that allow us to improve value-based healthcare, quality safety, and also advanced knowledge. But the idea of a learning health system was very ethereal. It wasn't really clear how to go from 0 miles per hour to 60 miles per hour and create an instantiated learning health system. And we realized we couldn't boil the ocean all at once. And so instead of trying to create what we envisioned to be PEDSnet back now 12 years ago, we decided to create a prototype, a single disease, inflammatory bowel disease, with a single pediatric subspecialty, pediatric gastroenterologists. We got a $12 million grant from the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality to develop the prototype and learn about the data challenges and the facilitators to create data sharing, the regulatory issues, and also the approaches for research, how you can leverage this new data asset to conduct research. It was a very successful program. It allowed us to figure out the roads, that, if you will, towards a national scale learning health system. So we launched PEDSnet following that with funding from the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute. Initially, we had 8 institutions. We've now grown to 11 institutions, and we anticipate and hope, I guess is really the right word, that this will become the infrastructure for leveraging electronic health record data for all pediatric research. So the scaling started in 2014, 2015, and it continues today. PEDSnet is a national network. It's a collaboration platform, in effect. It has a social side to it. We work very closely together with one another to conduct each other's research. It has a technical component, the sharing of EHR data. It has a scientific component, conducting research together. And it has a community component, the creation of patients and families engaged with clinicians and scientists and informaticians and analysts, project managers, all coming together to create this platform that enables rapid scale and at scale learning to advance outcomes for children and the health systems that serve them. The map shows where PEDSnet patients reside. The H's are hospital systems. Remember, hospital systems today are not just inpatient facilities. They include outpatient clinics, community clinics, primary care practices, community-based urgent care centers, and even some children's hospitals' own retail clinics. So it's when you say a children's hospital, it doesn't really capture the diversity that PEDSnet encompasses. On the right here on the slide are the institutions. The yellow highlighted institutions are brand new institutions to PEDSnet. Children's National in Washington, D.C. is now a full-fledged member. Indiana University and Texas Children's Hospital are both in the process of joining. Very exciting, because with the addition of these institutions, we've now expanded to, you'll see, nearly 10% of all US children. Our vision, our collaborative vision across all these institutions, is to create a national scale learning system that enables ultimately real-time improvement. So although we have data latency now of anywhere between a month to 3 months, we do envision a day in which the data that we've pulled and aggregated and created this data repository together serves as an asset that we can all leverage in real time for clinical decision support and near real-time analytics. Our organization is fairly straightforward. We're a large group, but we're a streamlined group. This is very intentional. We've tried in the creation of PEDSnet to break down bureaucracy and enable rapid cycle learning. So we have a steering committee. It is composed of one leader per each institution. It also has parents who are part of it, and we have alternates. So from your institutions, there will be 2 people who attend the steering committee meeting, and we rotate which parents attend. So we include parents in our governance to keep that sense of engagement at all levels of our network organization and our research. Our coordinating center has a few different components. We have a data pipeline unit that's responsible for receiving the data, running data characterizations, and putting it into production. We have an analytics group composed of data scientists and biostatisticians. We have a project management group as well, and we have an engagement unit. The first 3 are all based at Children's Hospital Philadelphia. Our engagement unit is based at Seattle Children's Hospital. And we're also launching, and I hope to add this to the slide soon, our Center Without Walls, which will enable all of your institutions to serve as coordinating centers for research studies. And one of the most important steps towards our vision of a Center Without Walls is this training program, is training as many people as possible in how to conduct analyses using the PEDSnet data. We do have 2 subcommittees. We have a data subcommittee that's responsible for the data governance of the data asset. That includes an informatician from each of the institutions. And there's a technical data pipeline working group that deals with the ETL conventions that are developed nearly on a monthly basis. We have a research committee. Actually, it's a subcommittee that reports to the steering committee that oversees all research and also is involved in reviewing requests to collaborate, requests for research projects, in other words. We've also pulled together a regulatory working group to deal with things like data use agreements, policies around sharing of data that deal with data governance, things like that. So with the addition of our newest members, we expect PEDSnet to grow to over 12 million patients in our data repository. Patient data goes back to 2009, and it's updated on a monthly to quarterly basis. We have 14 different hospitals. Actually, CHOP just added a new hospital, so it'll be 15 soon. Nearly 20,000 physicians, 350 primary care practices, 40 EDs and urgent care centers, and over 70 community clinics. In any given year, in this new version of PEDSnet, 10% of all US children will have a visit with a PEDSnet institution, which is really a profound thing to think about. It wasn't that long ago that we had no data infrastructure for studying children's health and healthcare. And now we're at almost 10% of the nation's children. And we hope to get to a point where all of the nation's children are connected on a platform that enables for rapid learning to improve health and transform the way in which children grow, develop, and become flourishing adults. So the data resource starts with each of your institutions' source data stored either in your electronic health record data warehouse or in your enterprise or clinical data warehouse. Those data are extracted locally and then transformed according to the standards that are set by the data models work group to the OMOP common data model. We have a number of pediatric extensions of the OMOP data model. An example is body mass index, age, sex, standardized Z-scores. And then we are now at a point where we are submitting these data on a monthly basis. we do the full common data model submission every 3 months, and then on months 2 and 3 in between those quarterly submissions, we are submitting data restricted to a COVID-19 subpopulation. And there's a very active data quality program in PEDSnet. We have data quality assessments that occur when we receive the data, and then we do all kinds of data quality assessments for each research study. You'll learn more about that in this course. And when we find problems, we have the capacity to remediate the data quality problems by working with the institutional teams to change the way in which the data are extracted and transformed to the standards. The data that are stored in the common repository, in the PEDSnet data repository, include essentially all the structured data in the electronic health record. So that includes anything with a terminology code like diagnoses, medications, procedures, labs ordered, and lab results. It includes anything that's a numeric, such as blood pressure, heart rate, respiratory rate, etc. It also includes demographic data, information about each encounter, where the type of encounter was an inpatient, outpatient, ED, physician specialty, etc. So a pretty broad swath of data, but not everything in the electronic health record. We don't, for example, include physician and other clinicians' notes. All that narrative is excluded. Those unstructured data can be extracted on a study-by-study basis. And we're actually doing that, applying natural language processing to physician notes right now in a number of studies. Importantly, we are paying increasing attention to how we can better engage not only parents, but also youth. So with Seattle Children's Hospital's leadership, we're strengthening our involvement of youth in the network. We're expanding the services that are offered. So we like to see that youth and parents are part of every research study. So we have a number of ways that teams can get parental and youth input into their research design and their ongoing conduct of research. We're also going to be updating our website to make it more patient-centered, more friendlier website. Our website right now is functional, but it could use some work to make it more modern. And we're going to be evaluating the effectiveness of our engagement activities as we go along. In this slide, you're seeing that the number of requests that come to us, quote, through our front door has been increasing nearly at an exponential rate. So to date, we've received over 250 requests for research. Some of those are not accepted because they're out of scope for us. But of those that are accepted, we've had 105 funded studies. Our funding rate is well over 50%, which is better, which is quite good. Funders, whether it's NIH, AHRQ, FDA, CDC, or industry, view PEDSnet as a positive resource, as actually something that strengthens an application. Our grant dollars now exceed over $125 million. The staff in the coordinating center at CHOP totals nearly 40 people. The published papers increased nearly weekly. We have well over 85 papers now. Let me now tell you a bit about the research that we do. I can't go through all the studies, but I kind of wanted to give you a flavor of the kinds of analytics that PEDSnet data can be used for. So I'm going to focus primarily on health data science and observational research, but I'll touch on a couple of clinical trials. When we did that initial prototype of PEDSnet using Improved Care Now, inflammatory bowel disease, pediatric gastroenterology, we wanted to advance the methods for comparative effectiveness research. So we started by asking families, what are the big questions that you're facing that if we could do a research project would yield valuable information? We got a lot of input on that. And the topic that rose to the top was, well, my child is starting this new therapy, Remicade, Humira. We call these biologics. They're expensive. They have long-term side effects, and they've never been studied in a controlled way in pediatrics. So is it possible to evaluate the outcomes of these biologic therapies in kids with inflammatory bowel disease, contrasting those who got biologic with those who didn't get biologics? In effect, what the parents ask is, are biologics working? We know that there are no studies done on kids. And we then translated that idea into something that was researchable. So if you think about it, what we needed to do was to identify episodes of illness. Kids who start biologic therapy typically have an escalation in the severity of their illness. And when they become moderate or severely ill, clinicians will discuss the possibility of starting biologics. But not everybody who becomes moderately or severely ill starts biologics. So the way these episodes of illness look in the electronic health record is that patient one's case, she started biologics and we were able to follow her over a period of time. Patient two also started biologics, but earlier in calendar time to patient one. And then drop down to the blue lines. The beginning of each of those episodes are kids who are also moderately to severely ill, but did not start biologics. They're the comparator group. So this is the naturally occurring way in which the data appear in the electronic health record. And then what the analytics do is they essentially treat each of these episodes like a pseudo trial, as though the patients were randomized to biologics on the top or to conventional care on the bottom. And we call those pseudo trials. So we looked at patients who were in the data set. We identified all of those who met our selection criteria, new onset, moderate, severe illness, and then we followed them for 6 months. What did we find? Well, what we found is that on the left, the kids who started biologics were 53% more likely to go into remission, that is to feel great and have no symptoms, than those who didn't. And the lines that you're looking at are on the top, the kids who started biologics, and on the bottom, the kids who didn't start them. And the rate ratio is 1.53. On the right side is something quite similar. It just also required that patients were not receiving steroids. So we did this study. Once we started it, in a matter of a few weeks, it probably cost several $1,000s. And we asked ourselves, okay, we know that this study in pediatrics, in a sense, replicated the same objective as the SONIC study in adults. That study randomized patients, adult patients with inflammatory bowel disease, to biologics or conventional care. It ran over many years, probably cost $12 to $15 million. So the question we asked is, and by the way, the outcome in that study was steroid-free remission. So we computed a rate ratio of 1.73. How close was that to the randomized controlled trial done in adults, done over 5 to 8 years at a cost of several orders of magnitude more than what we spent? And the answer was almost exactly the same. The 26-week steroid-free remission rate ratio in the SONIC study was 1.69. In our study, 1.73. So that gives you a feel of the kind of observational comparative effectiveness research that you can do with PEDSnet. It's also important to know that we in PEDSnet are supporting clinical trials. You can use the electronic health record data to identify eligible patients for a trial, and then use those targeted algorithms to not only identify them, but then you can re-identify them locally and recruit them into studies. Here's a study where we're looking at the outcomes of kids who have one of 3 different surgeries to remove kidney stones, either through ureteroscopy, a scope put up through the GU system up into the ureter or into the kidney to remove the kidney stone, shockwave lithotripsy, or surgery through the back, percutaneous nephrolithotomy. And this is an ongoing study. One of the cool things about this is that the surgeons and the radiologists who are doing the study have standardized the outcome measure, which is an ultrasound scan, and now are recording those data in a structured way so that after the study is over, the results are disseminated. We can monitor whether or not the patterns of the surgeries change and whether the outcomes change. That's a true learning health system model. We also are working with rheumatologists on the back off J-SPA trial. This is a clinical trial that identifies children with a certain type of arthritis. It's called spondyloarthropathy. It's about 1/3 of all juvenile idiopathic arthritis. And those kids who are on biologics and stable, biologics again is that medication I talked about earlier around inflammatory bowel disease, are randomized to cold turkey stop, decrease slowly over time stop, that's a taper, or no change. And we're using the electronic health record to facilitate recruitment into the trial. There aren't that many of these kids. And what we're already seeing is that by using these computerized algorithms, we're able to enhance and facilitate recruitment. And now the last batch of research I want to talk to you about is related to COVID-19. This is a big area of focus for us in PEDSnet right now. I'm going to show you a few different ways in which we've leveraged the PEDSnet data asset to understand COVID-19 better in children. We published the first large-scale paper that described acute COVID-19 in children in JAMA Pediatrics. This was published back in November of 2020. Ultimately, I think the print version came out in 2021. We looked at 136,000 kids under the age of 25. At that time, 3.4% of kids had been tested. You can see the demographics of our sample. We were able to use our data asset to identify kids who had the polymerase chain reaction type test. This was not something that was immediately available in the electronic health record data that were sent to PEDSnet. We worked with each institution to identify where the PCR data were located in their institutional data warehouses. We then validated whether they were finding the right data by comparing what we were seeing in PEDSnet data repository with internal registries, and that led to some changes both on our side as well as in the case of some institutions on the institutional side. And what we found was that 4% of the kids who were tested had tested positive COVID-19. So out of every 100 people tested below the age of 25, 4 out of the 100 had COVID-19 illness. You can see the risk factors for infection. We did find, and were among the first to report in pediatrics, that there were important and disturbing disparities by race ethnicity. Black and Hispanic individuals in particular had lower risk of being tested, so they're less likely to be tested, controlling on other factors, and they were more likely to experience COVID-19 illness. We were able to report on the case fatality rate data. Death is part of the data model. It was low, 0.2%, about what had been reported through case series from the CDC, but we were the first to actually provide a solid denominator. And we also were able to show that even among hospitalized patients, very few actually ultimately wound up in the intensive care unit with mechanical ventilation. We were asked by the White House Task Force when Delta hit to determine, is the Delta virus more virulent? That is, once you get the Delta variant, are you more likely to have severe illness than if you got the Alpha variant or a different variant? So these were early data that we presented that showed essentially the test positivity rates of COVID-19, again, using the PCR testing. You can see we've got calendar time here. We're able to look at it by age. You can see the peak over 2020 with the rise with the Delta variant. We then, now this study is in press in pediatrics. We extended the study all the way through December. Ultimately, we evaluated 866,000, think about that number, 866,000 kids who were tested for SARS-CoV-2 infection and who had a prior visit in the prior 36 months with one of our institutions. So we wanted to zero in on a patient population that was likely to come back for additional care. And here's the severity classification that we use. We knew that there were anywhere between 20 to 60% of kids who tested positive in our health systems, tested positive because they were hospitalized and everybody got tested, so it was incidental. It wasn't true illness. So we excluded hospitalization from our classification schema. And you can see what we did is we actually built code sets, clusters of diagnosis codes. In this case, we used the SNOMED CT diagnosis terminology. And we identified kids with acute bronchitis using a cluster of codes. Bronchiolitis, those were considered moderate severe. We also were able to identify kids who went to the emergency department and within the first 6 hours of being in the emergency department, received intravenous fluids. And we use that to characterize kids who are dehydrated, because we knew a common presentation for COVID-19. And then we were also able to look at kids who had some more severe illness, but we knew if they were admitted to the intensive care unit or if they needed to be mechanically ventilated. And this is the distribution of severity. About 2 in 3 kids didn't have anything that merited, in terms of their COVID-19 illness, that merited health care, but 1 in 3 did, and 6% of kids, about 1 in 16, had a moderate or severe variant. And then back to the question about, is Delta, or the Delta variant, causing more severe illness? We show that it didn't. So what you're seeing here is 2 lines. The y-axis on the left is the total number of patients who test positive, and that's the continuous line. So you can see the peak over the winter of 2020, 2021, a drop. You can see another peak with Delta, a drop, and then like a little bit of a peak here with the onset of Omicron. But the dotted line are the number of kids with moderate or severe illness. And what we're showing here is that, yeah, Omicron and Delta are both more transmissible. You're seeing these big peaks, but the number or the percentage of kids who have moderate or severe illness didn't change. In other words, the absolute number of kids were increasing, but the risk of severity, in other words, the virulence, did not change over the course of the study period. And here's a regression analysis that we did to show that if you put month of illness into the regression model, the peak risk, the peak adjusted odds ratio was back in June 2021, and with a decrease in risk during the Delta variant phase. So this just summarizes that we were able to show, because of the kind of data that are in the database, that the peak of testing was September 2021. The peak positivity rate was when Omicron emerged in December 2021. And we found some risk factors for test positivity and no evidence that the Delta variant was more virulent. And now I'm going to show you some data that are fresh off the press, hot off the press, on long COVID in kids. Long COVID is signs, symptoms, and health conditions that emerge after the acute illness phase. So they emerge, say, day 28 or later. This is a study that is being submitted as I speak to a journal for peer review. We identified 660,000 kids who are less than 21 who had an ongoing relationship with a PEDSnet institution. And of those, we identified about 9% who tested positive. The study period started at the beginning of the pandemic, and cohort entrance ended October 31st, 2021. But that allowed us then to look at another 28 days, which is the acute phase, and another 28 days after that, the December month, someone actually tested positive October 31st. We wanted to be sure that they had 60 days of follow-up, so they had at least 1 month of observation for long COVID. Here's a study sample, the way it broke down. And over on the far right, what we're showing are standardized differences. With large samples like you get from PEDSnet, p-values are sort of meaningless because the sample size is so big. So like many clinical trials, we favor reporting out standardized mean differences and standardized proportional differences, where a value of more than 0.2 suggests that they're non-overlapping distributions, and that's probably a difference that's worth mentioning and worth considering. So definitely a slightly older population for the kids who tested positive. And you also, it's cut off here, but we also saw that the months in which kids tested positive also varied between positive and negative. And the standardized differences are small enough in these other variables as not to be important or meaningful. So the methods that we took were to contrast the incidence rate of children who are PCR positive versus those who are PCR negative on literally nearly 700 different outcomes. So this is a big data type study. We're exploring a large number of potential symptoms, signs, health conditions, and medications that may be associated in the post-acute phase with COVID-19 illness. And our comparison group here are kids who were tested, but tested negative, all right? So we're gonna look now at the findings for syndromic, systemic, and medication features. The models that we use are proportional hazards models. which are time to event survival analysis type models that adjusted for a variety of important factors. And in addition, for those outcomes, which we consider to be chronic illness, we excluded anybody from the denominator for that one regression who had evidence of that condition 18 months before cohort entrance. That way, we're able to identify incident cases. So what were the most common syndromic features? Changes in smell and taste. We've all heard about that. Loss of smell, hair loss, chest pain. But unlike adults, we also see evidence of mild hepatitis, abnormal liver enzymes. We do see fatigue and malaise. Not a big adjusted hazard ratio. And the important thing here is that although fatigue is an important feature of COVID-19 illness and it's reported in long COVID, it's also pretty common in people who don't have COVID-19. So you actually narrow the effect size when you have an adequate comparison group. Systemically, we saw that there was increased risk for Addison's disease. That's a new finding. Again, it's showing the power of the PEDSnet database. It's so large that we can identify rare events like the onset of Addison's disease after 28 days following COVID-19 infection. We see myocarditis, inflammation of the heart. We also saw inflammation of the gingiva, and dentists are reporting across the country that they're seeing more gingivitis after COVID-19. We saw acute kidney injury. We also saw increased rates of kids with blood clotting disorders. Some things that are similar to adults and other things that are different. And here we're looking at medications. We used therapeutic classes to evaluate medications. And so we saw an increased risk of use of opioids because of higher levels of pain, presumably, more use of anti-inflammatories, et cetera. So I wanted to give you a flavor in this study that one of the strengths of PEDSnet is the ability to do big data analysis, to take diagnostic coding systems and develop clinical clusters, what we call code sets, to identify features like myocarditis or fever malaise, or to develop code sets based on RX norm medication codes. You'll hear more about that later in the course. And then leverage those code sets to generate new insights. And with all this work, what we were able to say is that the incidence rate of long COVID long COVID features, I should say, in kids who tested positive was only 3.6% higher than those who tested negative. That's a really important take-home message because it says that the chances that you're going to get long COVID after SARS-CoV-2 infection as a kid is about 1 in 25, pretty low rate. And then finally, the other study that it's important to mention is that not only do we have information about kids' medications, their diagnoses, other labs, et cetera, we also have information about their vaccines. And here what we're looking at is the risk of myocarditis and pericarditis, myocarditis, inflammation of the heart, pericarditis, the inflammation of the lining around the heart, in kids who had COVID-19, divided by kids who were vaccinated. So a higher rate means higher risk of that outcome, myocarditis or pericarditis, associated with infection compared with vaccination. So look at this, a 10-fold increased risk for those who got the illness versus those who were immunized for myocarditis among 12 to 17-year-olds. A 20-fold increased risk for those who were young adults, and then those for 30 or above, 60-fold increased risk. This study demonstrates, and it's going to probably come out in the CDC's MMWR in March 2022, this incredible benefit of vaccination with respect to getting the illness. So I want to conclude by saying PEDSnet does research, we build a community, we're a family, but we also provide training programs like this one to you, this data science analyst training program. We have a faculty training program. We're developing the new faculty scholars of the future. We have here shown faculty that have enrolled in our PEDSnet Scholars program. These are all assistant professors or associate professors in your institutions who are learning how to conduct patient-centered outcomes research within the context of a network like PEDSnet. And as we move forward into the future, PEDSnet is dedicated to strengthening our Center Without Walls. We want to add new institutions. We want to collaborate with an increasing number of subspecialty groups who leverage PEDSnet. We really want to generate more research that's informed by patient and parent priorities. I believe we're going to need to move our data pipeline from CHOP to a third party. That's part of our sustainability plan. There's no specifics now, but it's something that we want to look at in the future. We really want to improve our communications and keep you in the loop as there are new happenings within PEDSnet, and a variety of other things that you'll hear about as we go forward together in this bold experiment to build a new way of doing research for children, families, and the health systems that serve them. So thanks for your attention today in this talk. I'm glad you're part of the training program. And when we convene together during our video chat, I'll answer any questions you have about anything that I said. I'll introduce you to the course. I'll have a few questions for you as well as to why you're engaged in this and what you hope to get out of it. So give that some thought. Thanks very much.